Empire War Expanded Thrawn's Revenge 3.3 is now available, and in this video we'll be covering the biggest changes made with this release, with a more detailed, though still not exhaustive changelog available on the Steam Workshop and in the mod files. If you're already subscribed to the mod on Steam, the mod will automatically update. Updates are not save compatible, so if you would like to continue a pre-existing save from point 2, you can find a backup of prior versions on mod database. Some parts of this video may be familiar to those of you who have already been playing Fall of the Republic, but there's still quite a few differences with this version of Thrawn's Revenge. In both Thrawn's Revenge and Fall of the Republic, redoing the era progressive maps has been one of the major focuses. In prior versions of Thrawn's Revenge, you could choose to start in any era, with forces being different to reflect the state of the galaxy, but the selection of planets would remain the same, making the later eras relatively unengaging because they're so skewed towards the New Republic. Now every era has its own dedicated map with unique planet selection, geared towards making as many factions as possible as viable as possible. Every faction in every era should have something different to offer. With 7 current starting eras across 6 different map sizes, so small, medium, and large, for both the known and full galaxy, there are 42 entirely new progressive maps to play. This has included the early setup for every future playable faction in the mod, like the Hutts, Seruvi, Chiss, Corellians, and Killiks. While most of them are rather content sparse right now, they'll continue to be fleshed out over the next few releases until they finally become playable. New regional progressive maps have also been introduced, which are built around specific parts of the galaxy, allowing you to play with most of the standard progressive map features on a smaller, more focused map. The two introduced in 3.3 are the Borderlands region map and the Western Reaches. Borderlands focuses on the space between the Hapes Cluster and the Corporate Sector Authority, allowing you to recreate some of the campaigns between Zinj and other factions. The Western Reaches map is more focused on territory surrounding the Ariado Authority out to the Seruvi Star Cluster. 2 other pre-existing maps, the Corporate Acquisitions and Deep Core Conflict maps, have also been labeled as regionals and do allow you to pick starting eras, though they don't progress through Imperial regimes and eras the same way that the other regionals do. A new victory condition has been added to help in the completion of all progressive maps in particular. Once you've captured all Capital and Dreadnought shipyards, you'll be able to declare victory early. For players who do want a more focused campaign, this option should be very helpful. But if you want to take every single planet still, that is the default option and nothing but the AI will stop you. Galactic maps aren't the only ones to receive some love. There are over 40 new ground maps in Galactic Conquest and 24 space maps. On ground, we've been working to remove or improve some of the more problematic or unfun ones, ensuring we're keeping consistent guidelines in place for what works, and eliminating maps or elements which become a slog or unfun in other ways as much as possible. This has come with changes to landing zone values, which display their value on the hologram, and some other quality of life changes. With improvements to era selection come some changes to era progression and Imperial regimes, which is one of the biggest changes in the release. In prior versions, everyone's progression in the game would be tied to the Empire's leader, so time in the game would progress largely by killing Pestage, Isard, Thrawn, and so on, allowing everyone to get their newer units and heroes, which did give a feeling of progression, but it meant things could either progress very quickly or not at all depending on where the leaders were hiding. These functions have now been decoupled, so Imperial regimes are their own dedicated mechanic for the Imperial factions, while months and years progressing are their own thing, with any other event or research in the mod being tied to the most relevant criteria, rather than everyone having to rely on what the Empire is doing. The game will tell you what month and year it is, and time-based events will happen in specific months or years. For example, later on, when characters like Jason and Jaina Solo get added to the mod, we'll be able to make them become available when they hit the right age, rather than tying them to, say, Pelion being the Imperial leader or something. Things like the New Republic's research are typically tied to year progression in this way. Some events, units, and heroes do still rely on different factions interacting, but only when that makes sense for the event in question. Like Wedge being able to upgrade to Lusankia only when Isard isn't using it anymore. Our primary goal is to give as many ways for emergent and sensible storytelling within the galactic level of the game as possible with these mechanics. To see a full list of story events and how they're triggered, you can check the in-game story guide on the left side of the screen. The first change for Imperial regimes themselves is that, with nobody else having to rely on them for progression, You're now free to stay in a given regime for as long as you like, instead of a timer kicking you out. Secondly, when progressing from, say, Pestage, you have two options of regimes to support. Isard, like in prior versions, or the Central Committee of Grand Moffs from the Jedi Prince series, based on Kessel. Each has its own advantages, and whichever isn't picked will become a warlord force on the map at either Typhera for Isard, or Kessel for the Central Committee. You're able to progress from either one of these to Thrawn's regime. And this is where the biggest change to regimes comes in. Where Thrawn used to just advance into Palpatine and Dark Empire automatically, that is now its own separate mechanic. Legitimacy, introduced in the last version as a way to gain new Imperial heroes, is now building towards a mid to late game goal of drawing Palpatine in to form Dark Empire, and this applies to not just the Empire itself, but to the Pentastar Alignment, Greater Maldrude, Ariado Authority, and Warlord Zinja's Empire. When one of these factions has integrated two others, with the Empire itself counting as two, and has 60% or greater of galactic legitimacy, they then have the option to form Dark Empire, giving them access to the Dark Empire heroes and units, including units from prior versions like Palpatine himself, the Eclipse, the Sovereign, and a bunch of new toys like the Chrysalid Beasts and the long-awaited returning World Devastators. I did a full breakdown on the World Devastators recently, so I'll link that rather than re-explaining it here. But the basics are that they're able to gather material by participating in battles, which then causes them to improve and reproduce. Whichever faction formed Dark Empire is then essentially treated as the Imperial Remnant for the rest of the game, giving them the regimes of Karnor Jax, Dala, and Pelion to progress through. The formation of Dark Empire doesn't remove any pre-existing heroes for any faction, and doesn't have a time or regime requirement for the Empire, so you could keep both Thrawn and Palpatine for the rest of the game together, or you could trig it early and get Palpatine while you have Pestage, the Committee, or Isard, leaving Thrawn with the Empire of the Hand. All of these possibilities allow for many different ways to play through the game as any Imperial faction, and they even help shake up what you're going to be fighting against when you're playing as anyone else. The New Republic command staff has been expanded to include a Jedi command staff like in Fall of the Republic. So far this doesn't include any new characters, though that will change in the near future, and it does mean some characters who haven't been available in Progressives for a long time are now there. Luke is always present and excluded from the system, but for the other slots you have a choice between Mara, Kyle, Silgal, and Corran Horn. Just like in Fall of the Republic, economic and resource systems in the mod have been updated. Food and parts have been removed and replaced with a single infrastructure score. At its most basic level, this score is based on how many full or empty slots you have on your planets, so expanding too fast without the infrastructure to support it will cause malices, while if you keep your industrial juggernaut strong, you can even get some bonuses. This should be far easier for players to understand, with more clear connections to the rest of the game than the food and parts system, while still achieving the goal of limiting rushing and encouraging building up. If you want a deeper explanation of how to manage your economy in both Thrawn's Revenge and Fall of the Republic, I've done a dedicated guide video which I'll link on screen and in the description. We've also reduced starting forces and increased starting infrastructure, particularly in space. For all players, this should mean early money can go into customizing your fleet loadouts rather than building up defenses, and for newer players or players who prefer to turtle, this should also mean fewer resources in the early weeks of the game for the AI to repeatedly attack the player, which could sometimes be overwhelming. On higher difficulties, or especially if you turn on Cruel, the game should quickly get back to the fleet sizes and pace that you're used to from prior starts. This does mean you should think twice before turning on Cruel AI, although Cruel AI now comes with the ability to be disabled after you've enabled it, which wasn't possible before. This is part of a new suite of options available from a new build bar tab, which is accessed by pressing the Advanced Options button where the Cruel AI button used to be. This menu also includes options to enable different shipsets for the New Republic and Empire. The Fractal Sponge shipset enables the Impeller Battlecruiser for the Empire, while the Cannon Unit shipset gives the New Republic the Starhawk and MC-75, including adding Radis and Hera to the command staff options. These can be turned on for the AI as well using the same buttons. If you don't want to use this content, you can simply not press the button. If you're looking to try a different game mode from standard Galactic Conquest, Skirmish, or the game modes we've introduced over the last few releases like Ground War and Supremacy, which have been expanded to include more of the mod's factions, Survival mode, which longtime players may remember from very early versions of Thrawn's Revenge, has finally returned. Survival is a wave defense mode, where you build units to defend against waves of ever stronger enemy fleets. You can access it from the Game Modes and Historical Battles tab on the main menu. Right now it's just in its most basic form, and we plan to flesh it out further in future releases, but it's still a lot of fun. In every mode, some AI improvements have been made. Some of these are aimed at attempting to improve the AI's fleet compositions and mitigate some of the inbuilt preferences the Empire at War AI has, while others improve tactical and strategic behaviors. For example, stranded fleets will now make more of an attempt to rejoin the rest of their faction. 3.3 comes with a large selection of units and heroes added to the mod, the list of which you can read in the changelog or read very quickly on screen right now. Dozens of these new units and pre-existing units have had some new death animations made so they don't just disappear in a puff of smoke, though covering every unit with death animations remains an ongoing project. There have been plenty of further quality of life and polish changes over this release, including a massive amount of file cleanup to optimize file usage and organization, as well as reduce load times, dozens of new voiceover sets, and a large set of leader hologram animations done by Augustine Gaer and commissioned by Lord Shizor. That's all for now though. We hope you do enjoy the 3.3 release, and we'll have news on what comes next soon. 0.4 should be a much shorter release cycle, and it's time for the Hutts.